it is clearly why Senator Obama was elected president, right? Right here in Chicago, his hometown. It was the waves of anti-war sentiment, the millions of people around this country across the political spectrum who were deeply concerned about what was happening in Iraq. And he had bravely expressed his opposition to that war. Now the question is where he has taken that support. Now, there is no question what happened on Election Day 2008 was remarkable, historic in so many ways, among them the first African-American president in a country with a legacy of slavery. I mean, I remember in that period between his election and when he was inaugurated, I remember when he and Michelle Obama went to the White House to see the Bushes. I was invited on CNN that day to comment on this moment. And I was sitting in the CNN studios and there was sort of chatter, you know, on the show. And then I saw on the video the Obamas walking into the White House. And the host asked me about something else. I said, no, wait a second. We've got to take pause. There is Barack Hussein Obama and Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama walking into the White House. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama, her grandfather from South Carolina, descendant of slaves, which means their children, Malia and Sasha, are the descendants of slaves. They will soon reside in the White House, the most famous house on earth built by slaves. Let's just take pause. And it is incredible. It also makes me think about another house and what it meant for Barack Obama to be elected in the first days saying he would close Guantanamo, that he was opposed to torture. Now, he hasn't closed Guantanamo in the year he said he would, although he has made that promise. But even just saying he was opposed to torture was so important, was changing so much, which makes me think of this other house, not so far from the White House, a couple of hours away on the eastern shore of Maryland. See, Frederick Douglass, the greatest abolitionist, was born on the eastern shore of Maryland. And he was enslaved as a youth and a teenager. And it might not surprise you to know that he was a troublesome slave. And troublesome slaves were handed over to a man named Edwin Covey, known as the slave breaker. His property was called Mount Misery in St. Michael's, Maryland. And there he would beat and torture slaves as he did Frederick Douglass. But Frederick Douglass fought back and he escaped and he headed north and he changed the world with his North Star newspaper. There's a little coffee shop I go to in New York, in an old building. There's a plaque on the outside of it that said, when Frederick Douglass first came north, he took refuge here. It was a printing press of David Ruggles, who was born a free black man in Connecticut. And it's so interesting that Ruggles and Douglass saw the media as their means of liberation, because information is power. Now, that property where Frederick Douglass was tortured and beaten, Mount Misery, is owned by Donald Rumsfeld. It's his vacation home. He bought it in 2003 to be near his close friend, well, Vice President Dick Cheney at the time.
Cool.
Now, this is pretty astounding, and I learned about it, I researched it, but as a journalist, I felt it was important to see it with my own eyes. So, me and my colleague Dennis Moynihan, who edited Breaking the Sound Barrier with me, set out to St. Michael's. We went there during the Bush administration, and when we drove into St. Michael's, we didn't have much time. I was going to be speaking in Washington, D.C. in a couple of hours. I realized I have no idea where the Secretary of Defense lives. You know, how am I going to check this out? So I saw an organic coffee shop ahead of us, and I thought, you see a theme in my life. And I thought, oh, they'll tell the So we went inside and they said, what would you like? And I said, well, I'd like to know where Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, lives. They said, oh, just go out back. You go down the road and you'll hit Mount Pleasant Road. Don't go down that road. And you make a left and then a right and then another right. And you'll hit Mount Misery Road and you go down that road and he's at the end of it. So we started driving and we saw Mount Pleasant. We didn't go down that road. And we made a right and then another right. It seems we couldn't go right enough. We drove down the road, and there we saw a Secret Service, you know, the black tinted windows on the SUV, and we pulled up, and I took out my little camera, and I was zooming in as they were zooming out. And I was wondering, you know, does Donald Rumsfeld know the significance of this property? But sure enough, as I'm zooming in on my little camera, I see the stake in the ground right next to the driveway that says Mount Misery. So I head over to this ancient black church down this dusty road on this Sunday morning. And folks are inside having a Sunday school right before Mass. And there's an older woman sitting in the sanctuary, and I went up to her and I said, what do you make of all this? I mean, what a historic place. Frederick Douglass born here, he was killed here, he was beaten here at Mount Misery, he was tortured here, and now Mount Misery is owned by Donald Rumsfeld, who is known for, has come to represent torture in this country. And she said, I can't comment right now, we're in church. Well, from Mount Misery to Mount Hope, because a little while later, I told the story at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and a woman came up to me afterwards. I was speaking in upstate New York, right outside of Rochester, in Geneva, New York, and a student came up to me and said, I would like to take you, after I told the story, to Mount Hope Cemetery, because that's where Frederick Douglass is buried. I said, well, I'm leaving for Denver like 5 the next morning. There's the middle of a snowstorm. I said, if you meet me at 5 in the morning at the gates of the cemetery, you could show me. So we met and we trudged through the snow, and then we brushed off the snow from Frederick Douglass's grave. And then she got a twinkle in her eye and she said, could I just show you one more tombstone? I said, I can't miss my flight. She said, it's real quick. And we were walking, and then I'm running, and we get to this small tombstone of Susan B. Anthony, the great feminist who's buried next to her sister. Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass were not only allies, they were close friends. And when I told the story at Wesleyan, a woman came up to me and